I was originally just a spoiled rich young master drifting through life. But because I was handsome and kind-hearted, I ended up helping a poor but beautiful school belle. Then, at a critical moment, I saved my childhood sweetheart, who had almost been ruined for life by street thugs. Even my childhood sweetheart's elder sister, the lofty and untouchable sister-in-law who was the CEO of a wealthy family's corporation, started to look at me with a bit more favor because of it. Who would have thought that when I eventually fell into hardship, the only person willing to take me in would be a quiet, unknown mute girl? Simply because, years ago, I had casually bought her a meal and paid her grandmother's medical bill out of convenience. She had been silently watching over me, waiting for a chance to repay the favor. And what I never expected was that, when I opened a small bakery with her and began to accept such an ordinary life, the former CEO's sister-in-law, the once poor school belle who had risen to the ranks of the new rich, and my wealthy heiress childhood sweetheart, all came knocking on my door one after another, asking me to come back. Chapter 1. In the afternoon, behind the teaching building, in the small grove, I stood there with some interest, admiring the beautiful girl in front of me. Her name was Sophia, the undisputed school belle of our campus, always ranked first in the grade, without fail, a guaranteed candidate for a top-tier university. She lived up to her nickname, the Ice Queen, always wearing her faded, well-worn school uniform, always alone, her face devoid of unnecessary expression, proud and distant. But today, there were signs that this Ice Queen was starting to melt. That face, usually as cold as frost, now had lips bitten so hard they'd lost their color, and beneath her eyes were dark circles she could no longer hide. She stood there stiff and straight in front of me, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. I didn't speak, waiting for her to open her mouth. I didn't know why she'd come looking for me, a bottom-of-the-class troublemaker, but I could roughly guess it definitely had to do with money. Everyone at school knew my family was rich. George, her voice was a little hoarse, with a slight tremor, but she still tried to remain composed. I responded with a sound, signaling for her to go on. She took a deep breath, as if it took all her strength to squeeze the words out of her throat. I need money. 600,000. My mother is sick. She needs surgery urgently. After speaking, she stared at me, unblinking, her eyes full of despair and struggle. I nodded, letting her know I understood. Then, I said nothing more. The air grew frighteningly still. Only the rustling of the leaves in the wind remained, as if mocking her predicament. Her face grew paler and paler, until that taut string inside her finally snapped. I can give you anything. She lowered her gaze, her long lashes covering whatever emotions were in her eyes, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. Everything I have. When I heard that, I laughed, finding it somewhat absurd. Tilting my head, I looked at her with interest. From her hands clenched so tightly they'd turned pale, to her face flushed red with humiliation. So, I broke the silence slowly and deliberately. You think your body, or this so-called everything, is worth 600,000? With just that sentence, she snapped her head up, her body trembling violently, those beautiful eyes instantly filling with crushing shame. She opened her mouth, but not a single word came out. Her eyes turned red, moisture welling up inside, but she stubbornly refused to let the tears fall. After a full half-minute, she seemed to have made up her mind. Her voice carried a sob, yet was crystal clear. Not just my body. My heart, my life, my future, everything I have can be yours. As long as you save my mom, my life belongs to you. Well, that's quite a deal. A modern version of selling oneself to save one's mother. I almost wanted to laugh again. Her heart. The heart of an Ice Queen school belle might sound rare and valuable, but I don't believe in love. My dad, who keeps a mistress outside, and my mom, who has her own first love she still clings to. The two of them could marry for family interests and maintain the facade of a perfect couple for over 20 years. Do they have a heart? Maybe, but their hearts are both given to someone else. So don't talk to me about love. I don't buy it. I straightened up and walked over to her, a full head taller than she was. I could clearly see her trembling lashes, and the crystal clear teardrops clinging to them. I reached out my hand. She instinctively closed her eyes, her whole body tensing up. My fingers flicked her forehead lightly. She froze, opened her eyes, and looked at me blankly. I pulled my hand back, stuffed it into my pocket, and looked her straight in the eyes, asking each word slowly. Sophia, get this straight. Are you hoping I'll be the kind of scumbag who takes advantage of someone in crisis and makes a deal for your body? Or do you want me to be a good guy who does a good deed and helps you out? She was completely stunned. Her lips parted slightly as she stared at me blankly. Her brain clearly short-circuited, but I had patience, so I just kept looking at her. Finally, she snapped out of it. Her tense shoulders slumped instantly, and with a trace of humble hope, she replied, "Help me." Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz. "Please." But I simply shook my head and said, No, I'm not a charity. Even though I have money, I won't spend it where it's not necessary. 600,000 could buy me a decent bottle of wine. The pleading in her eyes instantly turned to anger and despair, probably at my deliberate teasing. Seeing her on the verge of breaking apart, that streak of dark humor in me dissipated. Oops, maybe I'd pushed too far. Although I didn't approve of her treating herself like merchandise, a life was at stake, and well, what can I say? Handsome and kind, that's me. So I changed my tone. However, since I don't want to be either the bad guy or the good guy, we can both be business people. She looked at me in confusion. I remember you have good grades, and you're a promising candidate for the future, so I can lend you the money. Think of it as a personal investment. 600,000. I can transfer it to you right now, or pay the hospital directly, your choice. Her eyes instantly lit up with overwhelming, incredulous joy. But I raised one finger. There's a condition. 10 years from now, you have to pay me back 1 million. The interest isn't high, so it shouldn't be too hard for you. At the same time, you must get into a top-tier university in the college entrance exam next month. That's the first proof you have the potential to repay me, and it's also my risk control clause. She froze. Then, as if she'd grabbed the last straw she could reach, she nodded hard, afraid I'd change my mind. I gave her my phone number, then turned and left, not bothering to see what expression she wore. Good. As I stepped out of the grove, sunlight spilled over me again, warm and bright. Just then, a boy in a school uniform came running toward me. When he saw me, his eyes filled with hostility, and he glared at me fiercely. Judging by the direction he was heading, it seemed he was going to find Sophia. I frowned. Wasn't that the guy rumored to be second in our grade? The one who'd been chasing Sophia for 3 years? Yeah, looked like him, but his taste was questionable. A girl who can think of selling herself to repay a debt, can she really tell the difference between love and everything else? I stretched lazily. Not my problem anyway. I've never believed in love. Still, I'd need to get a lawyer to draft up the terms. TSK, such a hassle. Truth is, I never cared whether she'd repay me. 600,000 means nothing to me. The contract and clauses were just for show, for outsiders, and for me to set a gate. Otherwise, today it's Sophia, tomorrow it's some dark Sophia, and soon every random person will be knocking on my door for money. No matter how rich I am, I couldn't burn through it like that. I'm the most idle and unambitious one in my family, so I have to save my money to make sure I can stay a slacker and still live in luxury for life. Spending 600,000 to buy myself the satisfaction of, I did a good thing today, while also getting a front row seat to watch the school belle's humiliation. Not a loss, but if I had to do this every day, I'd never stand it. Chapter 2. After finishing my talk with the lawyer, we set a time and place. I hung up and casually forwarded the contract to Sophia. That was that. I started walking toward my original destination, a club activity classroom. Through the window, I could see what was going on inside. My childhood sweetheart, Alicia, was chatting animatedly with a young man who looked like a street punk. The Liu family and my family were practically family friends, with close business ties, so Alicia and I could be considered childhood companions. But that wasn't the important part. The important part was Alicia's sister, Willow Liu, a true daughter of privilege, beautiful, sharp, and, most importantly, particularly good to me. Every time she saw me, the pocket money she gave me was in the millions. For someone like me, who's made it a life goal to coast through life doing nothing, she was basically a walking ATM. Anyone who gives me money is a good person. That's my life motto. What's more, Willow was about to get engaged to my well-dressed, overachieving older brother, Luis. Soon, she'd be my official sister-in-law. Family ties upon family ties, my cushy, idle life would be even more secure. So when Alicia's grades dropped from the top ranks to the middle of the pack because of some street punk, and Willow asked me about it directly, I knew I had to step in. If you take someone's money, you should get things done for them. That's how you keep the benefits flowing. Before I could even enter, a boy came running out, eyes red, and bumped right into me. He staggered back a couple of steps, then looked up at me with eyes full of humiliation and unwillingness. I recognized him. I think he was one of those poor students Alicia used to sponsor. Good grades, honest personality. Judging from the look on his face, this had to be one of those tragic, I fell for my benefactor. But my benefactor fell for a bad boy dramas. I shook my head, a little amused. Kids still too young. For people like us, second-generation rich kids, giving money or helping out is often just a habit, a way to show status. It doesn't mean we're actually good people. If you really want to be grateful, climb up in the world and repay with benefits. That's called understanding how the game is played. Tie emotions into it, and you're just asking to get hurt. See, now you're left feeling like a kicked dog. I ignored him and pushed open the half-closed door. With a creak, the scene inside was laid bare. Alicia was half reclining in the arms of that punk Martin, laughing so hard her whole body shook. Martin's hand rested very inappropriately on her waist, slowly caressing. When she heard the door open, Alicia's smile froze. Seeing it was me, she immediately frowned. George, what are you doing here? She sat up from Martin's arms, her tone full of wariness and impatience. You're here to tell me to break up with Martin too. Let me tell you, don't waste your breath. She stood and looked me up and down, her eyes full of contempt. You, a useless young master from the Wang family, can't even sort out your own life. What right do you have to tell me what to do? I didn't get angry, if anything. I felt like laughing. Useless. That label has been my carefully maintained brand for over a decade. What's there to be angry about? I dragged over a dust-covered chair without asking, sat down, crossed one leg over the other, and let my gaze slide past her to the man behind, Martin, whose eyes refused to meet mine. Ear piercings, nose ring, tongue stud, and a head of blinding green hair. Well now, all the boxes ticked. Looked like he'd been cut and pasted straight out of some old edgy teen magazine. Relax. I waved a hand at Alicia with a harmless smile. I'm not here to control you. I'm just curious. I looked at her with interest. How did the obedient good girl of the Liu family suddenly fall for this type? My tone was so casual that it only seemed to irritate her more. What do you know? She raised her voice, like she was trying to convince me, or maybe herself. Martin is different from you hypocritical rich brats. He lives real. He lives free. She clung to Martin's arm, her face glowing with something close to fanatic worship. This is what it means to live. Your kind of cookie-cutter life, that's what's boring. That's what's a waste. Then she turned the spearhead toward me. Especially you, George. You can't study. You can't even play hard, other than being from the Wang family. What are you? You're nothing but a total waste. Oh, I nodded, as if I'd just had a sudden realization. Got it. The wind of youth. Right. Alicia probably thought she'd convinced me. There was a flash of smugness on her face. Martin straightened his back too, his expression toward me no longer quite so nervous. The next second, I grabbed the chair I'd been sitting on and, without warning, swung it down at Martin's leg with all my strength. Bang! A deafening crash, accompanied by Martin's pig slaughter scream. The whole world went silent. The smugness on Alicia's face froze instantly, melting into sheer terror. She stared blankly at Martin, writhing on the floor clutching his leg, then looked back at me in disbelief. George, are you insane? She screamed, lunging at me, clawing for my face. I sidestepped, grabbed her wrist, and with my other hand, gave her cheek a light slap. Smack. Not hard, but the insult landed heavier than the force. Alicia was stunned, clutching her face as tears spilled down like broken beads. You hit me. Are you thinking straight now? I let go of her wrist, looking down at her from above. She flinched under my gaze, instinctively taking a step back. Martin was still groaning on the floor, looking up at me with fear in his eyes. Didn't you like being real? Like being free? I stepped over and planted my foot on his chest. Come on, tell me, how's it feel right now? Free enough for you? Martin was drenched in sweat from the pain, unable to say a single word. Alicia tried to come forward, but I shut her down with a single glare. Aren't you supposed to be so tough? Such a streetwise player. I squatted down, patting Martin's face. Why so quiet now? He trembled all over, not daring to make a sound. I straightened up, suddenly bored, with that little courage, and he's out here trying to woo a rich family's daughter. I grabbed Alicia, who was still shaking, and dragged Martin along the floor like hauling a dead dog toward the door. Let me go. I need to take him to the hospital. Martin, shut up. I cut her off coldly. One more word, and I'll break his other leg too. Alicia went silent instantly, sobbing without pause. I didn't take them to the hospital. Instead, I hailed a cab straight to the west side of the city, the well-known gathering place for all kinds of shady characters. Smoky internet cafes, pool halls full of hustlers, women loitering on the street, and drunk men reeking of alcohol. I dragged her out of the car and shoved her against the wall of a filthy back alley. The stench of urine and rotting garbage hit us like a wave. Alicia threw up on the spot. I ignored her, pointing toward the alley entrance, where a few green-haired thugs were cursing at each other and shoving around. Look, this is the wind of youth you like so much. Real enough, free enough. If you like it, I can toss you over there right now. Let them show you what it really means to live. Alicia's face went paper white, her whole body trembling like a leaf. She clung to my arm, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. I was wrong. George. I was wrong. Let's go home, please. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a familiar figure. Martin, limping. He was sneaking away from the other end of the alley while we weren't looking. Ran faster than a rabbit. Didn't even spare Alicia a glance. I couldn't be bothered to chase him. Trash like that wasn't worth another move. Alicia clearly saw him too. The blood drained from her face completely, and the last shred of her illusion shattered with that fleeing back. She stopped crying, just stood there blankly, like her soul had been pulled out. I shoved her back into the car and gave the driver the Liu family's address. The whole ride, she didn't say a word. When we reached the Liu residence, she got out on her own and walked inside like a ghost. I didn't get out, just told the driver to turn the car around and take me home. That night, I got a text message from Willow. George, thanks. I replied with a "you're welcome" meme, and that was that. As expected, over the next 2 days, the Liu household was calm. No one came looking for trouble. My mother did hint at me once, asking what happened. I simply said Alicia was being foolish, and I helped the Liu family discipline her a little. She didn't press further, just told me to be mindful of my limits in the future. I knew for sure it was my future sister-in-law Willow who smoothed everything over. Yeah, that was a good move on my part. My cushy, idle rich life was safe, but the very next day, I couldn't laugh anymore because Martin was dead. Car accident. Accidental death. There's no such thing as coincidence like that. Beaten by me one day, dead the next. I'm not an idiot. If this didn't have Willow's fingerprints on it, I'd cut off my own head and use it as a soccer ball. Turns out my future sister-in-law was even more ruthless than I'd imagined. Suddenly, I felt like this family was a little terrifying. Everyone wore an immaculate mask, calmly moving pieces on the board of profit, coldly removing every obstacle in their path. My elite older brother Luis was like that. My charming, calculating future sister-in-law Willow was like that. And my parents, the picture-perfect couple in public, were no different. Only me. I was the odd one out, a useless man who just wanted to drift through life. I shuddered violently and sat up in bed. No, I had to move out. Immediately. Right now. Get away from these sharks. To keep living. So I can keep coasting. Chapter 3. I made the decision to move out in just one night. I didn't tell anyone. Early the next morning, I went downstairs with a suitcase I'd already packed. My mother was sitting in the living room, elegantly drinking her morning tea. When she saw me, she merely lifted her eyelids slightly. Where are you going? Changing places to sleep. I kept it short. She didn't ask again, lowering her head to continue reading her finance magazine. As for my so-called father, he'd probably spent the night at some mistress's place and hadn't come back. This house was as cold as an ice cellar. Everyone lived on their own track, never interfering unless their interests were at stake. Without looking back, I rolled my suitcase out of that luxurious yet utterly lifeless villa. I owned a penthouse in the city center that had been sitting empty for ages. Now it finally had a use. The apartment was big and empty. The fridge was even emptier. I drove my sports car to the largest supermarket nearby. I needed to fill this new place with food and junk, and also stuff away the restless irritation in my chest. Pushing the shopping cart, I wandered through aisles crammed with goods, chips, cola, chocolate, frozen pizza. I threw things into the cart like a scanning robot, my face blank. Just as I turned a corner, reaching for the limited edition wafers on the top shelf, I stopped in my tracks. In the corner of the snack aisle, a girl was stealthily shoving a bag of bread into her sleeve. She looked a few years younger than me, small in stature, wearing a faded, clearly ill-fitting school uniform. Her face was clean though, palm-sized, with big eyes like a startled fawn. Too bad her hands weren't so clean. I didn't say a word. I just leaned against the shelf, arms crossed, watching her with interest. She was struggling. It was a small sleeve, big loaf. She tried again and again, until sweat broke out across her forehead in frustration. Finally, as if sensing something, her movements froze. Slowly, she lifted her head. Our eyes met in midair. I didn't speak. I just stared at her. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. Her face changed color before my eyes, from white to red, then red back to white. Those big eyes first filled with fear, then panic, and finally with shame and humiliation so heavy it was almost tangible. The hand holding the bread trembled violently. Plop. The bread fell to the floor. It was as if all her strength had been drained. Her shoulders slumped. Her head hung low, like she wanted to bury her face in the ground. I lost interest. I walked over, bent down, picked up the bread, and tossed it into my shopping cart. Then I swept all kinds of cookies, candies, and chocolates from the nearby shelf into the cart in one go. Before long, the cart had become a small mountain. Pushing it, I stopped in front of her. She kept her head down, body rigid, as if awaiting judgment. I nudged her faded canvas shoes with the tip of my foot. No money to eat. She stayed silent, her body flinching slightly, then gave the smallest of nods. A second later, as if realizing something, she shook her head hard. I was starting to get impatient, nodding, then shaking her head. What was this? A mime act? What's going on? Speak. My tone was sharper this time. She flinched all over, then jerked her head up to look at me. Her eyes were rimmed red, brimming with tears she stubbornly refused to let fall. She opened her mouth, and a few broken sounds came out, oh, ah, but no real words. Then she shook her head urgently. hands flailing in some awkward gestures. I froze. For a split second, one thought flashed through my mind: mute. Looking at her anxious, helpless expression, the irritation in me instantly burned out, replaced by a strange, hard-to-name frustration. Damn. So now I'd officially become the jerk who bullies the disabled. The kind of thing you remember in the middle of the night and want to slap yourself twice for. I didn't say anything else. Instead, I went and grabbed another shopping cart. Milk, cereal, self-heating rice packs, canned food, instant noodles, everything I could think of that was easy to store. I piled in until the cart was full. Then, pushing 2 carts, I jerked my chin toward the checkout counter, signaling for her to follow. She stared blankly at the 2 mountains of food, then at me, as if she hadn't processed it yet. I couldn't be bothered to explain, just took her by the wrist and headed for the cashier. Her wrist was cold, thin enough that it felt like it might snap with a little pressure. After paying, I carried all the bags myself while she trailed behind like a little tail, holding the lightest snacks. I stuffed everything into the trunk and backseat of my flashy sports car. Get in, I told her. She hesitated, but eventually opened the passenger door and got in. Address. She paused, then pointed to her mouth and shook her head. I unlocked my phone, opened the map, and handed it to her. She tapped the screen with her small fingers for a while before finally setting a location. The West Side, Old District, a place I'd never have a reason to pass through. I didn't comment, just started the engine. The ride was oppressively silent. She kept her head down, hands gripping the hem of her shirt, like a startled bird that had wandered into human territory. The car wound through narrow, run-down alleys until it stopped in front of a crumbling apartment block. I killed the engine and helped carry the food inside. The stairwell was dark and damp, filled with the smell of mildew and something else I couldn't place. She led me up to the 3rd floor and opened a chipped wooden door. The heavy scent of herbal medicine hit me instantly. The place was so small you could take it all in at a glance. Bare bones didn't even begin to cover it. On an old wooden bed lay a frail old woman, eyes closed, breathing weakly, as if she could slip away at any moment. The girl set down what she was carrying and hurried to tuck the blanket around her, worry filling her eyes. I could guess the situation. She wasn't stealing because she had no money for food, she had no money for medical care. The bread theft was probably because she'd been starving but didn't want to touch the money needed for her grandmother's treatment. TSK. Another tragic sob story, and damn it, I'm the type who can't stand that. Once she'd settled her grandmother, the girl came over and gave me a deep bow. Then she grabbed a battered notebook and pen from the table, writing quickly. When she finished, she handed it to me, in neat, delicate handwriting. It read, "Thank you. How much did all this cost? I'll definitely pay you back someday." I almost laughed. Pay me back? With what? Steal again? I didn't say anything, just pulled out my phone and called my family's private assistant. The stench of poverty and medicine in the room was giving me a headache. All I wanted was to throw money at the problem and be done. Lao Wang. Contact the VIP ward at the Central Hospital for me. Within 15 minutes. Send an ambulance to the old apartment block in the West District. I'll text you the address. Bill it directly to my account. I kept it short and hung up. The whole thing took less than a minute. The girl was completely stunned. She stood there, mouth open, staring at me, forgetting to cry, forgetting to write. I could understand that. For her, something that would take a lifetime to even dream of was, for me, just a phone call away. The gap between worlds can be that cruel. What are you standing there for? I nudged the travel bag at her feet with my shoe. Pack up, we're going to the hospital. She snapped out of her daze and began scrambling to gather her things. Not that there was much to pack, just a few faded old clothes and an enamel cup with a chipped rim. The ambulance arrived quickly. Professional medical staff carefully lifted the elderly woman onto the stretcher. From start to finish, the girl clung tightly to the hem of my shirt, as if afraid I might suddenly disappear. It made me a little uncomfortable, but I didn't shake her off. At the hospital, everything was arranged perfectly. A private VIP ward, round-the-clock caregivers, and a team of top specialists immediately beginning their consultation. I stood outside the spotless room, watching the busy doctors and nurses, and the girl sitting by the bed, torn between fear and gratitude. The lingering gloom I'd been carrying since Martin's death seemed to lighten a little. Spending money really could buy a good mood. Then my sleeve was tugged gently. She held up that battered notebook again, offering it to me. "How can I repay your kindness?" "I never said you had to," I replied, leaning against the doorframe, watching this small, stubborn girl and feeling oddly intrigued. She hurriedly scribbled on the page, her writing messy from urgency. "No, I can't just take your money for nothing. You're a good person, but I can't." Good person. Seeing those 2 words, my smile widened. These days, someone like me counts as a good person. Money really is a beautiful thing. First of all, I'm not a good person. I cut off her gestures. Second, I told you, I hate trouble the most. Standing here arguing with me about this, that's giving me trouble, understand? She looked a little dazed by my twisted logic, staring at me blankly, unsure how to respond. I sighed. What can I say? Handsome and kind, that's me. I stepped closer, took the notebook and pen from her, and started writing. Consider this me buying insurance in advance. She looked at me in confusion. I wrote again. Study hard, get into a good university, find a good job. If one day I end up broke, begging on the street, remember to buy me a bowl of food. When I was done, I shoved the notebook back into her hands. She stared at the words for a long, long time. Then she looked up, and in those eyes, clear as mountain spring water, tears finally spilled over. She didn't cry out loud, just silently let them fall, one by one, onto the worn notebook. All right, that's enough crying, I said, averting my gaze awkwardly. Your grandmother still needs you to take care of her. What kind of example are you setting, bawling like that? After a moment, I added. What school do you go to? I'll have Lao Wang take care of your tuition. And every month, I'll have him send you 5,000 for living expenses, until you graduate and find a job. Don't tell me you don't want it. Think of it as my insurance premium. Without waiting for her reply, I turned and left, giving the doctors a few instructions before heading out. Driving along the wide boulevard, I suddenly found it all a little funny. Me, the second young master of the Wang family, falling into ruin, not a chance. This was just spending money to rack up some good karma. After all, the people around me were as ruthless as they came. I needed all the good karma I could get to make sure this slacker life of mine lasted for a long, healthy, and very wealthy lifetime. Chapter 4. And then I fell from grace. 5 years. It only took 5 years. My human appearance but dog-like elite brother, Luis, cheated right after getting married. When the news broke, I was sunbathing on a private island. When I got the call, I even felt like laughing. Expected. My dear brother, at his core, was a spineless coward who loved to act like some deep, devoted man. It was only a matter of time before he got his soul stolen by some fluttering temptress. I couldn't even be bothered to fly back and watch the farce. After all, rich family marriages are all the same kind of mess. Nothing unexpected ever happens, until my bank cards, one after another, were frozen. Every property, stock, and fund in my name changed hands overnight. Only then did it dawn on me that something might be seriously wrong. By the time I rushed back from the island, everything was already over. The Wang Corporation now bore the surname Lu. My father had been formally prosecuted on multiple economic crimes. The evidence was ironclad. He'd be singing behind bars for the rest of his life. Luis had been kicked out with nothing, and that mistress of his had vanished without a trace. He looked like all the bones had been pulled out of him, a complete wreck. And me, a useless man whose only ambition was to eat, sleep, and waste away. I hadn't been spared either. The private stash I'd been carefully hoarding for over 20 years, gone. Not a cent left. I stood at the door of my penthouse, staring at the 2 black-suited bodyguards blocking my way, my head buzzing. Come on, lady, if you want revenge, go ahead. Kill my brainless brother and his mistress for all I care. But throwing my father in prison and gutting the Wang family empire, what the hell was that for? Just thinking about it made my blood boil. Seriously, Luis, are you even a man? If you've got the guts to cheat, but no ability to stop your wife from exacting revenge, then why bother at all? I almost felt dazed. Was I really living inside some female protagonist revenge story, playing the cannon fodder relative who gets taken out as collateral? The door opened. Willow was sitting on my favorite Italian sofa in the living room. She wore a silk slip dress, the hem revealing a stretch of pale leg, her posture elegant as she swirled the wine in her glass, my years-old bottle of Romanée-Conti. 5 years later, she was even more beautiful and colder. That commanding aura of hers felt like it could crush you without a word. When she saw me, she set down her glass and gave me a gentle smile, as if we were still family, as if she were still the gracious sister-in-law I used to know. George, you're back. I said nothing, just stared at her. She stood up, barefoot, stepping across the soft wool carpet until she stood right in front of me. Don't look at me like that. I didn't want this either. She reached out, as if to touch my face, but I turned my head away. She didn't get angry, just withdrew her hand and spoke slowly. Your brother was too stupid. I gave him a chance. Unfortunately, he didn't treasure it. I gave a short, cold laugh. So that's your reason for wiping out our whole family? No. She shook her head, and her expression suddenly took on a hint of amusement. In fact, I've always found you much more interesting than your brother. Unfortunately, back then I needed the heir to the Wang family, not some useless loafer who lived to eat and do nothing. She paused, her voice gaining a touch of allure. But now, things are different. He was the one who betrayed me. My revenge is perfectly justified, and now, I don't need a husband anymore. She stepped closer, the rich scent of her perfume filling my nose, an aroma that carried aggression. George, Interested in staying? Let big sister take care of you. Just like before. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. I laughed so hard I almost doubled over, tears pricking my eyes. Tut tut. I wiped the corners of my eyes, staring at her flawless face. Hearing you say that, I can't help wondering, was that mistress planted in my brother's bed by you? The smile on her face froze for just a second. It was only a heartbeat, but I caught it. Any last shred of wishful thinking in me vanished. Of course, this woman had been a lunatic from the very start, willing to use any means to achieve her goals. I dropped the smile and looked at her without expression. Then, slowly, I raised my middle finger in her face. Get out. The last trace of her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, impassive mask. Ingrate. She waved her hand without another glance at me. 2 bodyguards stepped forward, one on each side, and lifted me like a chicken. I was shoved out of my own home. The door slammed shut behind me with a sharp bang, cutting me off from everything I had once owned. Standing alone in the empty hallway, I let out a short, derisive laugh. If I'd actually believed her crap and stayed as her pet, by the time she got bored, I probably wouldn't even know how I died. I knew perfectly well I couldn't beat her. Even my father, the old fox, had been outplayed by her. What chance did I, a man who only knew how to drink and party, have? Best to keep as far from this crazy woman as possible. Staying alive was more important than anything. I pulled out my phone. No money meant the first priority was survival. Scrolling through my contacts, I found the so-called brothers who'd always called me Brother Wong with a grin. I dialed the first number. Hey, Lucas. It's George. There was a 3-second pause on the other end, then a cautious voice. Who? Sorry, wrong number. Beep, beep, beep. They hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment, then gave a bitter little laugh and dialed the next one. Same result. The third, the fourth. Either wrong number or no answer at all. TSK. One more realistic than the last. Leaning against the cold wall, I deleted their numbers one by one. By the time I was done, the only ones left on the screen were family contacts, grayed out, and no longer reachable. I sold off everything of value I still had on me. Altogether, it amounted to less than 100,000 yuan. In the old days, that wouldn't have covered a single night's bar tab. Now, it was my entire fortune. I needed a way to make money. I wandered the streets aimlessly, turning over ideas, and somehow found myself back under my old apartment building. Tilting my head back, I looked up at the bright lights of the penthouse that had once been mine, and gave a wry smile. Then I turned away. If nothing else, I could find work in a factory, screwing in bolts, low barrier, food and lodging included. Besides, I'd had more than enough of the rich life over the past 20-something years. No regrets. Head down, I walked on, planning my next move, when I suddenly collided with something soft. A faint, clean fragrance drifted into my nose. I instinctively started to apologize, but when I looked up, my gaze slammed straight into a pair of clear eyes. A young woman with delicate features, dressed simply in a white t-shirt and jeans, clean as a blank page. She looked vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen her before. But she clearly recognized me. I could see it in her eyes. In that instant she knew who I was. They lit up with something I couldn't quite name. Joy, relief, and something else entirely. Chapter 5. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then seemed to think better of it. Instead, she hurriedly dug a phone out of her pocket and began typing quickly, the glow of the screen lighting up her slightly nervous face. I frowned. Somewhere in the dusty corners of my mind, this silent way of communicating stirred a faint memory. Mr. Wong, do you still remember me? Mr. Wong. Not many people called me that anymore. I studied her face, and the fragments of memory began to fit together. 5 years ago, the trembling figure in the supermarket, the girl caring for her grandmother in a shabby apartment, the one who wrote, "How can I repay you?" in a notebook. It's you, I realized. Surprised, her eyes lit up instantly, dazzlingly bright, and she nodded so hard it was almost comical, the joy in her gaze spilling out in waves. I was more confused than ever. What are you doing here? She typed again, fast, then handed me the phone. I saw the news about the Wong family. I was worried about you. I guessed you might come back here to look. So, I waited. Since yesterday, something in my chest gave a quiet, unexpected thump, which meant, in the 24 hours since I'd been thrown out, she'd been standing here, in front of a building I could no longer enter, holding on to the barest chance of seeing me. The clumsiest kind of vigil, an absurd, complicated feeling welled up inside me, while my so-called friends had been scrambling to distance themselves from me. A girl I'd almost forgotten, a girl I'd helped once, 5 years ago, had waited here for me for an entire day and night. I tugged at the corner of my mouth, wanting to say something like thanks, but I don't need it, or go home. This isn't your problem. But looking into those eyes, so pure they held not a speck of impurity, those stock phrases I always used to keep the world at arm's length refused to come out. She must have seen my awkwardness, because she typed another line. You don't have anywhere to go. I stayed silent, which was answer enough. She put the phone away. Then she did something I never expected. She reached out and gently, tentatively, took hold of my hoodie sleeve. Her grip was so light I could have shaken it off with no effort at all. But that faint pull, soft yet carrying a thread of plea and determination, felt like an invisible chain locking me in place. She turned and began walking toward the street corner, still holding my sleeve, and, against all reason, I followed. We stopped in front of a small bakery, its windows spilling warm light and the sweet scent of sugar into the night air. The sign read Twilight Bakery. The door was already locked, but the lights inside were still on. She unlocked it, then glanced back at me, silently inviting me in. The shop was small but spotless. The smell of cream and wheat instantly chased away the cold that had clung to me all night. She poured me a glass of warm water first, then pulled a carefully wrapped folder from under the counter. Opening it, she took out a yellowed sheet of paper and slid it toward me. It was the insurance clause I'd scrawled in messy handwriting 5 years ago. If one day I fall on hard times and have to beg on the street, remember to buy me a bowl of food. She pointed at the words, then at me, then at herself and the shop. Her eyes were dead serious, like she was fulfilling a sacred contract. Finally, she turned, took a warm croissant fresh from the oven, tore it in half, and handed me a piece. No pity, no sympathy, only a quiet, unquestioning, it's my turn now. I looked at the half piece of bread in my hand, then into those clear, unwavering eyes. To hell with factory bolt turning. I took the bread and bit into it. The taste was nothing like the fine dishes I used to eat, but it carried a strange sense of comfort. Are you hiring here? I asked around a mouthful, my voice hoarse and sounding unlike my own. The girl froze for a moment. Then, a huge, radiant smile bloomed across her face. She nodded hard. That day, the aimless first half of my life came to an end. And the second half became tied irrevocably to this little shop called Twilight Bakery. And my boss was the mute girl I'd once thought I'd never cross paths with again. Chapter 6. The young girl's name was Anna, a beautiful name. With the help of the money I had provided and the savings she had managed to put aside herself, after graduating from university she opened a bakery on this old street called Glimmer Baking. The shop wasn't large, but the business was good. It seemed that all the neighbors went out of their way to support her, often making a detour to buy a few loaves of bread and exchange some casual gossip. A young girl managing all by herself, it's not easy. Well, now she's got help. That's a relief to see. Wearing an apron printed with little teddy bears, I clumsily packed the freshly baked toast while hearing those comments, feeling no particular ripple in my heart. Relief. I was a good-for-nothing who had never done any physical work nor even recognized most grains. How exactly did they see me as reassuring? Still, my arrival had indeed lightened her load quite a bit. At the very least, she no longer had to grit her teeth and force herself, a small and slender girl, to carry heavy sacks of flour or sugar alone. At night, once the shop closed, we would return upstairs to that tiny home. If bare walls and empty rooms described her old place, then here was perhaps just a little better than that. One dining table, 2 chairs, a sofa, and a small room partitioned from the balcony. That was my bedroom. It was smaller than the bathroom in my old villa, yet I slept more peacefully here than I had in any night over the past 20-some years. No scheming, no hypocrisy, only the faint scent of wheat drifting up from the shop below. I began learning how to live like a normal person. Learning how to sweep without sending dust flying everywhere. Learning how to use a pressure cooker to make porridge without blowing up the kitchen. Most of the time, the results were disastrous. I once mistook salt for sugar and made a pot of unbearably salty red bean paste. She took a sip, her little face scrunching up completely. Yet she didn't spit it out, she simply drank a big glass of water in silence. Then she picked up a pen and wrote in her notebook, "The taste is special. Next time maybe put a little less sugar." Looking at her so serious, I felt both annoyed and amused. I grabbed the bowl and dumped it straight into the trash. From then on, I started learning sign language, not for any particular reason, just because it felt like making her write everything down in a notebook was wasting too many pens. I bought a stack of learning materials, and every night after she fell asleep, I would sit in my tiny room and practice in front of my phone screen, over and over. From the simplest, hello and thank you, to you worked hard today and good night. When I first used my slightly awkward gestures to tell her good morning, she froze. Then, in those usually calm eyes of hers, it was as if a star had suddenly been dropped in, brilliant and dazzling. She raised her hands as well and responded with the utmost sincerity. You too. In that moment, I felt that nothing in my past 20-some years had ever felt as worthwhile as this. The days went by like this, slowly getting better. I went from being a complete idiot who couldn't even use an oven to a baking apprentice who could skillfully whip cream, decorate cakes, and knead dough. Business in the shop kept improving, and we even took over the store next door to expand. My bank card once again had a decent amount of savings, enough for me to move out and rent a place of my own. Several times, I thought about telling Anna, but each time, the words stuck in my throat and I swallowed them back down. Move out, to where? Eat what? Living alone would be boring. And besides, she was just a young girl, it wasn't easy for her either. I could still help out, couldn't I? I came up with several dignified-sounding reasons for myself, then shamelessly continued to stay. Anna never brought it up. It was as if she had accepted my presence as naturally as the rising sun, as naturally as the pot of pothos sitting on the windowsill. I didn't believe in love. My father, my brother, they were the best cautionary tales. But this sense of steadiness I had with Anna, it was addictive. I shook my head, pushing those messy thoughts out of my mind. Right, I didn't believe. Oh, it was almost noon. Time to prepare her lunch. She'd been coughing a little lately, so I should stew some pear for her. I had just untied my apron and was about to go upstairs when a familiar figure pushed open the shop door and walked in. Chapter 7. The woman who entered wore a perfectly tailored suit, her makeup flawless, hair swept up in a neat bun. Every inch of her radiated the aura of an accomplished professional. It was Sophia. 5 years had passed, and all traces of the humility and awkwardness born from poverty had been scrubbed clean. She was no longer the ice queen school beauty who once wore a faded uniform and pleaded with me in that grove of trees. Now, she was refined, immaculate. Following behind her was a young man, probably in his early 20s, also in a suit, good-looking like a freshly graduated university student. The look he gave me was filled with unhidden scrutiny and hostility. Ah, the male assistant. Sophia's gaze paused briefly on the teddy bear apron I wore, her brows twitching almost imperceptibly before she quickly smoothed her expression into a polite smile. George, long time no see. I nodded in greeting, my hands not pausing as I untied my apron. You, she seemed about to ask something, but thought better of it. In the end, she simply pulled a check from the Hermes bag at her side and slid it toward me. This is 1 million. I know there are still a few years left before the 10-year agreement, but now that I can afford it, I wanted to repay you early. I glanced at the number, picked up the check, and slipped it into my pocket. Thanks. It was what I was owed, though I had never truly expected to see it again. My straightforwardness left her prepared speech stuck in her throat, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She had probably expected me to decline, or at least to show some shock or gratitude. Unfortunately for her, I didn't either. The male assistant behind her, seeing how readily I took the money, looked at me with even deeper disdain, now tinged with a smug as expected. Sophia quickly recovered her composure, her gaze sweeping over our small bakery before finally settling on me with a look I knew all too well, a lofty, condescending kind of pity. George, I heard about your family situation. If you don't have a suitable place to go right now, you can come work at my company. My husband and I have just started it, and we're in need of people. I can arrange a position for you. Don't worry about the salary. The way she played at compassion made my stomach churn. Back then, our deal had been simple. I invested. She repaid. The debt was settled. Neither of us owed the other anything. Now she was striking this pose, as if turning her former creditor into someone in need of her charity. I glanced at the increasingly hostile-looking assistant beside her and suddenly understood. She was savoring the thrill of rescuing someone. Just as I had once admired her desperation, she now enjoyed my so-called fall from grace. Only she was more hypocritical, wrapping it all in a veil of gentle benevolence. Too bad I had no interest in following the male assistant's path and starring in some cliched affair born of gratitude. No need, I said coldly. I'm fine here. My refusal made her smile freeze for a second. George, don't be stubborn. I know what kind of life you used to live. And now, her tone was full of presumptuous I understand you self-importance. I said, no need. I cut her off, my voice already edged with impatience. She finally stopped insisting, a faint displeasure crossing her pretty face at having her generosity rejected. Fine. If that's your decision, I won't force you. This is my card. If you change your mind, you can contact me anytime. She placed the card on the counter and turned to leave. The moment she turned, her male assistant immediately stepped forward, offering his hand in a gentlemanly gesture to lightly touch her arm. Sophia naturally tilted her head toward him, giving him a smile filled with intimacy, one only the two of them would understand. That was my moment. Casually, I picked up my phone and pressed the shutter without a word. The angle was perfect, his hand nearly at her waist, her smile far too warm to be directed at a mere subordinate. Take care now, I said lightly, waving my phone at them. Sophia and her assistant left, the black Porsche disappearing around the corner. It took me 2 minutes to look up her husband's public email online. Then, I sent the photo to him anonymously. Once done, I deleted the photo and the sending record, feeling much lighter. Be his mistress if you want, none of my business. But glare at me, well, I'll just have to make sure you don't enjoy your day. Chapter 8. After that, I went upstairs to make lunch. Sharing a quiet meal with Anna gradually settled my thoughts. Leaning against the counter afterward, I started thinking about what to do with this unexpected 1 million. The feel of the paper was undeniably real, and the number printed on it was so clear it was almost dazzling. How long had it been since I'd seen this much money? At the very least, our lives would no longer have to be so tight, and Anna could finally get that new equipment she'd been longing for. The more I thought about it, the happier I felt. I'd never found 1 million to be quite this useful before. Just then, the wind chime over the door jingled, and a clear yet deliberately delicate voice cut through my pleasant daydream. George. I turned around to see Alicia. Quite the day for familiar faces to stop by. She was wearing a white dress, her long hair draped over her shoulders, looking pure and innocent, like some unworldly little white flower. If I remembered correctly, her unlucky husband Makoto, the poor student she took back after leaving Martin, had jumped to his death less than 2 years ago. What is it? I leaned against the counter, expressionless. She bit her lip, her eyes glistening like rippling water. That hesitant, on the verge of speaking look was her most practiced weapon. I want to see you. I almost laughed out loud. Miss Liu, what kind of act are you putting on this time? She froze for a second, then her eyes reddened as if she had been dealt some unbearable injustice. George, I know I was foolish before. I made so many mistakes. I hurt you. I always thought I wanted some grand, passionate romance, but now I've realized, what I truly want is just a peaceful home. She lifted her head, those watery eyes locking onto mine, full of supposed deep feeling and regret. George, let's start over. I know your situation right now. My sister was indeed out of line, but it doesn't matter, I can support you. Oh, the classic redeemed wild girl. Love worth more than gold routine. But let's get one thing straight, when exactly did we ever start for me to start over with you? I barely managed to suppress the urge to roll my eyes, my thoughts drifting back to a few years earlier. Her wedding to that poor student Makoto had been grand and moving. At the ceremony, she cried as she declared that he was the light of her life, the happiness she would grasp no matter the cost. I had stood in the crowd, looking at that utterly moved, tear-stricken fool of a groom, with only one thought in my head: this guy is doomed. And sure enough, less than 2 years after the wedding, Alicia was bored. She had never truly loved a person. She loved the idea of love itself. She loved the image of a moth diving into the flame, the satisfaction of being the lone rebel when the whole world objected. When the passion faded and marriage returned to its mundane rhythms, she naturally grew tired. Then, right on cue, a perfectly timed pretentious coquetteman appeared. What followed was as cliched as a primetime soap opera. Cheating, discovery, fights. Only, her poor boy husband wasn't quite as spineless as she might have liked. He had proof of Alicia's infidelity and wanted to strike back, to salvage some pride. And then, he jumped to his death. There's no such thing as a coincidence that perfect. Behind it, I could almost see the handiwork of my former sister-in-law, Willow Liu. And that's exactly why I've always despised her, double standards ingrained down to her bones. When my brother cheated, she destroyed the entire Wang family, righteous revenge. Of course, when her sister cheated, she helped cover up every loose end. Naturally, it was just family loyalty. She was never some embodiment of justice. She just needed a justification, something that would let her take everything with a clear conscience. My brother's infidelity just happened to hand her that justification. Nothing more. Pulling my thoughts back, I looked at Alicia still performing her deeply affectionate act in front of me, the curve at the corner of my lips widening. Alicia, do you honestly think all men are idiots? Her expression froze. Your husband's funeral was quite the grand affair, I said slowly. I saw the news. You cried your heart out. Truly a scene to move anyone to tears. Her complexion began to pale. Too bad. I shifted my tone. That if I hadn't happened to be standing outside a hotel that night, I wouldn't have seen someone who looked an awful lot like you, arm in arm with some pretty boy, stepping into the elevator. The blood drained from Alicia's face instantly. Oh, right, I pretended to recall something. That pretty boy didn't get to enjoy his luck for long, did he? You just happened to find out later that he was the one who drove your beloved husband to his death. And then, wouldn't you know it, he also jumped to his death. Alicia, aren't you tired? I took a step forward, locking eyes with her trembling pupils. Wearing that mask every day, doesn't it make you sick? She backed away repeatedly until she bumped into the doorframe, shaking like a leaf in the autumn wind. Why, you're talking nonsense, she snapped, but the bluster was paper thin, her voice leaking weakness like air from a punctured balloon. I couldn't be bothered to waste more words. I wasn't worried she'd retaliate. A woman so obsessed with playing the role of the saint would never allow herself to lose control and lash out in rage. Her persona was more important to her than her life. That mask, she'd worn it so long it had fused to her face, Impossible to remove. Get out. I spat the word. She fled like she'd been pardoned, stumbling out with a disgraceful retreat. Why did I know so much? Because back when I was the idle, good-for-nothing second young master of the Wang family, my greatest amusement was devouring the gossip of the wealthy circle. Watching these impeccably dressed men and women do filthy things behind closed doors gave me a strange sense of superiority. Look, they're no better than anyone else. So even if I chose to waste my life doing nothing, I had nothing to feel guilty about. In a crowd of inhuman people, insisting on staying human, isn't that a kind of effort to live? The shop finally returned to silence. I let out a long breath, feeling as though I'd expelled 5 years' worth of pent-up foul air. Soft footsteps came from the stairs. Anna walked down carrying a bowl of freshly stewed dessert. She set it before me, then picked up the notebook from the table and wrote a line. "A friend of yours?" I shook my head. "Not really, just an acquaintance." She wrote again. "You look unhappy." I looked into her clear eyes. There was no pity in them, only genuine concern. Taking the bowl still steaming in my hands, I felt the warmth seep into my palms and flow straight to my heart. "No." I shook my head, then set the bowl down and used my still clumsy sign language to tell her, "I'm fine." She understood, and a sweet smile bloomed across her face. She raised her hands in return, signing carefully. "That's good." Sunlight streamed in through the shop window, wrapping us in gentle warmth. The air was filled with the familiar scent of cream and wheat. I lowered my head and took a sip of the sweet soup. Delicious. Chapter 9. After that day, I stopped paying attention to anything from my old circle, and I cut ties with them completely. Now, all I wanted was to live well with Anna, running this little shop together, keeping our days simple and steady. Every morning at 5, I'd get up half an hour earlier than she did to start the first batch of bread proofing downstairs. By the time she came down, still sleepy-eyed, the kitchen would already be filled with the scent of wheat, and the hot water would be ready. She would always greet me first with a "good morning" in sign language, then smoothly tie on her apron and start working on the day's desserts. We didn't talk much, but our coordination kept improving. She handled the delicate piping and decoration. I took care of the heavy lifting and the register. Sometimes when things got hectic, and she was sweating under the rush, I'd quietly turn down the air conditioning or hand her a glass of ice water. When she took the cup, her fingers would sometimes brush against the back of my hand, cool, soft. I began noticing all her little habits. We no longer avoided certain topics, and she stopped trying to cautiously guess what I was thinking. Life felt full. In the daytime, we ran the shop together. At night, she taught me how to make more complex desserts, and I taught her some silly sign language I'd learned online. Sometimes she'd bend over laughing. Those silent smiles were more beautiful than any sound. My signing became more fluent. Sometimes we could go the entire evening without paper, without speaking, and still have a complete conversation. "That old man came to buy cake again today," I signed. He said it's for his granddaughter," she replied. "Do you believe that?" "No, probably for his wife." We looked at each other and smiled. That kind of unspoken understanding made me feel safe. I started seriously considering something. I wanted to marry her. I still didn't believe in love, but I was beginning to believe that some people are simply meant to be together. I just wanted to keep living like this with her. I wanted everyone to know she was mine. I wanted to be able to take care of her openly when she was sick. I wanted to still be there when she grew old. 3 months later, I confessed to her, or rather, I proposed. It was her birthday. I kept it from her and prepared a small surprise in the shop. When she came downstairs that night, the whole place was glowing with candlelight. The usual cake boxes had been turned into little lamps, warm light spilling through the colorful wrapping paper. She stood frozen at the stairs, covering her mouth. I walked up to her, knelt on one knee, and took out a ring. It wasn't some astronomical diamond, just the best one I could afford from the jewelry shop nearby. "Anna, I don't know how to say pretty words. I don't believe in grand vows of eternal love, but I want to run this shop with you until we're both too old to walk. Will you?" She cried. Tears rolled down like beads from a broken string, one after another. She nodded hard, then held out her hand for me to put the ring on. It was a little big, her hands were too thin, but she clenched her fist tightly, not letting it slip off. I hugged her, breathing in the faint scent of her hair. In that moment, I suddenly felt that the first 20-some years of my life had all been just preparation for meeting her. Chapter 10. Our wedding was simple, not large in scale. We only invited neighbors from the street and a few classmates and friends we were still on good terms with. Those so-called second-generation rich friends who used to avoid me like the plague, of course, weren't on the list. As for my mother, ever since she had married her lover in record time, we'd had no contact. I didn't reach out either. Some ties, once cut, are better left that way. No need to force it, and certainly no need to invite them. I didn't want any kind of flashy spectacle. I just wanted to give Anna a proper wedding. The day before, I went to the barber shop to tidy myself up and bought a decent suit. Anna's wedding dress was one we picked out together. When she tried it on, she seemed to glow. Standing outside the fitting room, looking at her in the mirror, I suddenly felt like it wasn't real. This beautiful, angel-like girl was actually going to marry me. On the wedding day, everything went smoothly. Anna's grandmother had recovered quite a bit and attended in a wheelchair. The old lady held my hand and said in a faint voice, "Thank you for taking care of our little Anna." I felt a bit embarrassed. It's her who's been taking care of me. When it came time to exchange rings, Anna's hands were trembling. I held her hand and whispered in her ear, "Don't be nervous, it's just a formality." She let out a small laugh, and her tension vanished. The officiant asked me, "Mr. George, do you take Miss Anna to be your wife, to love, respect, and protect her in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth?" "I do." Then the officiant turned to her, "Miss Anna, do you take Mr. George to be your husband, to love, respect, and protect him in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth?" Anna couldn't speak, but she nodded firmly and signed, "I do." The officiant froze, unsure what to do next. I smiled and translated for her. She said she does. The audience burst into warm applause. During the kiss, she was shy, her face red like an apple. I kissed her lips lightly, so lightly it was as if I were afraid of hurting her. Then I leaned close to her ear and said, "Mrs. Sue, I'll be in your care from now on." She laughed in my arms, her shoulders trembling. At the banquet, one of the neighborhood uncles, a bit tipsy, took my hand. "George, you found yourself a good wife. Treat her well." I know. Friends were happy for us, coming over one after another to toast and offer congratulations. An old roommate said, "George, you've changed." "How so?" "You used to look like you didn't care about anything. Now you look like a normal person." I glanced at Anna, who was chatting with her grandmother, and smiled. Maybe because I have something worth caring about now. After the wedding, we returned to our place upstairs. Everything was the same as before, only now there were more flowers and gifts from the ceremony. Anna changed out of her dress into her usual home clothes and went to the kitchen to make me a late-night snack. I stood at the kitchen doorway, watching her move about, and felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. This was the life I wanted. Just two people, living simply. She brought the food over and saw me staring off into space. She waved her hand in front of my face. "What are you thinking about?" "You," I answered honestly. Her cheeks flushed, and she gave me a playful smack. Then she wrote in her notebook, "George, we're married." We're married. Do you regret it?" "No." I shook my head. "You?" "I don't either." She wrote, "It just feels a bit unreal, like a dream." I reached out to pinch her cheek. "Does it hurt?" She covered her face and glared at me. Then she wrote, "It's not a dream." It wasn't a dream. Chapter 11. Married life turned out to be even calmer than I had imagined. Every morning, we'd get up together and prepare the shop's goods. Anna handled the baking. I took care of packaging and greeting customers. At noon, we'd have lunch together. Then she'd take a nap while I read or scrolled on my phone. In the afternoon, we'd open again, and after closing at night, we'd have dinner together, sometimes going out for a walk. Life was so simple it could almost be called dull, yet I found it deeply fulfilling. Sometimes, watching Anna work with full concentration, I'd wonder, how could this girl be so beautiful? Sometimes when she made a new dessert, she'd bring it to me first for tasting. Seeing her expectant expression, I would always give an exaggerated thumbs up. Then she would smile, her eyes curving into little crescents. We rarely argued, and even if we had disagreements, they were resolved quickly. Her gentle nature had a way of softening my temper, too. On slow business days, we'd close the shop early and walk to a nearby park. She liked feeding pigeons and always carried a bag of breadcrumbs. The pigeons already recognized her. At the sight of us from afar, they'd flap their wings and fly over. She would squat down, scattering the breadcrumbs carefully, and the pigeons would cluster around her without fear. I'd sit on a bench, watching her with them, a warm feeling filling my chest. Sometimes children would wander over, curious. She'd share some breadcrumbs with them, showing them how to feed the pigeons. Though she couldn't speak, her gestures were gentle, and the children all liked her. Half a year later, Anna became pregnant. Holding the test results, she was as excited as a child. "We're going to have a baby," she signed, her whole face glowing. I took the report and stared at the numbers, my feelings a swirl of excitement, nervousness, and a flicker of fear. I was going to be a father. Could someone like me really be a good dad? Anna seemed to read my worry. She came over and hugged me. "Don't be afraid," she signed. "We'll learn together." During the pregnancy, Anna's health was fragile, and she often felt nauseous and vomited. I took over all the heavy work in the shop so she could focus on resting. Sometimes, hormonal changes made her emotions unstable, and she would suddenly cry. I never knew what to say to comfort her, so I just stayed by her side and handed her tissues. "I'm sorry," She signed through her tears. I don't even know why I'm crying. It's fine, I told her, patting her back. Just let it out. In the later months, her belly grew so large that everything became inconvenient. I threw myself fully into caring for her, afraid anything might go wrong. One night, she suddenly had stomach pains. I panicked and rushed her to the hospital. The hours waiting outside the delivery room were the longest of my life. At last, a nurse came out carrying a tiny baby. Congratulations, it's a girl. Both mother and daughter are safe. I took the baby into my arms, looked at her little face, and suddenly burst into tears. This was my daughter, my and Anna's daughter. Anna lay on the hospital bed, weak but content, watching us. She looks like you, she signed with trembling hands. Nonsense, she looks like you. We named her Ray, because we hoped she would be like light, brightening our lives. Chapter 12. On the day our daughter turned 1 month old, we had an unexpected visitor at the shop. Willow. She was still as graceful and composed as ever, though there were now a few fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She looked at the baby in my arms, her face showing an unusually gentle expression. Such a lovely child. Thanks. I was wary. What are you here for? Relax. She smiled faintly. I'm not here to cause trouble. She sat down, bought a few loaves of bread, then said casually, as if making small talk. Do you remember? When we were younger, we both thought love was just a trick made up by bored people to fool themselves. I frowned but said nothing. I still think so, she said, sipping lightly from her glass of water. Marriage, family, they're just unions of interests and responsibilities, cold and tedious. She paused, finally turning her gaze on me, her eyes complicated. But now, it seems that between the two of us back then, one of us was lying. You don't actually disbelieve in love, Willow said, word by word. You just didn't believe it would ever happen to someone like you. I didn't argue. So, she stood up. Congratulations, George. You found the life you wanted. From her bag, she took out a folder and set it on the table. What's this? Your assets, she said. I'm returning them to you exactly as they were. Think of it as a gift for the little one's first month. I was stunned. Why? Because when I took them back then, it was only to toy with you, see how you'd react. She chuckled. Didn't expect you to get lucky and have a good girl pick you up. At the door, she glanced back at me, and there was a faint trace of envy in her eyes. George, you're really lucky. Treasure it well. Then she left. I opened the folder. Inside were property deeds, share certificates, and bank account details. They were exactly as I remembered, actually, even more than I remembered. These things, once the sum total of my life, now lay quietly before me, but I didn't feel the wild joy I might once have imagined. Yes, this money mattered. At the very least, it meant Anna wouldn't have to work so hard, and our small family could face whatever storms came with a stronger foundation. But compared to them, what did any of this really mean? Wah. In my arms, Ray suddenly scrunched her tiny face and began to cry. As if sensing something, I snapped back to the moment, tossing that folder of high-value documents aside without a second thought and fumbling to soothe her. Oh. Ray, shoo, Daddy's here. Don't cry, don't cry. Hearing the crying, Anna hurried down from upstairs, worry flickering on her face. She looked at me, then at the conspicuous folder on the table, a trace of tension in her eyes. I gave her a smile and mouthed, it's nothing. She's hungry. Anna signed smoothly as she reached my side. I carefully placed our daughter in her arms, looking at her rosy little face, my heart turning to mush. Be good, Ray. Daddy's going to make your formula right now. Anna held our daughter, watching me fumble clumsily with the formula, her face full of happiness and gentle warmth. Sunlight streamed through the spotless glass window, wrapping mother and daughter in a soft golden halo. Willow had been right, I really was lucky. Carrying the bottle, I sat down beside Anna. Willow came by just now, I said while testing the milk's temperature. Anna's expression tensed. What did she say? Nothing much. Just came to see the baby. I didn't want the tangled mess of the past disturbing the life we had now. She said Ray is very cute. Anna let out a small breath of relief, then picked up pen and paper to write. Of course our daughter is cute. Watching her write so intently, I felt a sudden impulse. Anna, she looked up at me. I love you. I had once thought I'd never say those words to anyone, but now they came out of my mouth naturally, almost uncontrollably. She froze, her eyes instantly welling with tears. I love you too, she signed, tears spilling down her cheeks. Love you so much. I set our daughter down and pulled her into my arms. In this small room, sunlight poured in through the window, and our daughter slept peacefully in the cradle. Everything was quiet. Everything was beautiful. I thought, this was my life now. No grand, earth-shattering romance. No legendary tale of meteoric success. Just living each day with the person I loved, simply and peacefully. And that was enough. Later, our business grew better and better, and our daughter grew up healthy and happy. Sometimes, I would take my wife and daughter to visit my father in prison. The old man was in good spirits. The scheming look he once wore had eased, and he always brightened up when he saw his granddaughter. He would ask me how I was doing, and I would tell him, "Pretty good." He'd nod and say, "That's good." Time flew by. Our daughter learned to walk, then to speak. She called me daddy and called Anna mommy. The three of us lived like that, simple, ordinary days. No great rises or falls, no heart-stopping drama, but every single day was steady and full of happiness.